So with pandemic concerns apparently on the back burner for Trump, his re-election campaign tour is moving full speed ahead. As I mentioned a minute ago, his next rally is Saturday in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right after a trip to coronavirus hotspot Florida for a briefing on drug trafficking and a campaign fundraiser. And yes, Saturday's rally will go on despite the new COVID surge in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that city officials have linked to Trump's rally there last month. The event in New Hampshire will at least be outdoors, unlike Tulsa, but attendees will not be required to wear masks. And if his focus over the past few weeks tells us anything, it's that Trump is not likely to spend much time talking about the pandemic on Saturday. Instead, we're likely to hear more appeals directly to his base with the same race-baiting rhetoric we saw in his Monday tweet, falsely accusing NASCAR's only black driver, Bubba Wallace, of orchestrating a hoax after a noose was found in his garage, and in these comments from a pair of 4th of July speeches.
Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities. We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children, or trample on our freedoms.
I'm joined now by Bina Venkataraman. She's the editorial page editor of the Boston Globe, and Boston City Councilor Lydia Edwards. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Bina, I just spoke to Dr. Vanessa Curry about Trump's coronavirus avoidance, and the strategy seems to be change the subject, exacerbate the racial divide in this country. Even if it doesn't work in November, what's the long-term effect on this country of Trump's relentless crusade?
Well, I think in part he's undermining trust in public health guidance, in public health information. So by, for example, arguing that schools should open and that the CDC's guidance on the safety of schools reopening and sort of the measures that should be taken by schools, that would be changed because he wanted them to be open and Vice President Pence wanted them to be open. That kind of politicization of public health response, of science that's used to guide people in their lives, whether it's the hurricane forecast he allegedly altered back when Hurricane Dorian was bearing down on the south.
With the Sharpie, right?
The Sharpie Gate, as it's known, or these incidents, I think it's going to take a lot. Public trust in these federal agencies and the scientific guidelines they put out is a matter of life or death. It's a matter of whether people evacuate when there's a hurricane. It's a matter of whether they wear a mask in a pandemic. And we're seeing that undermining really is falling along political lines so that, Republicans are ignoring basic public health advice right now.
I want to move, Councilor, if I can, to the race side of his efforts. I mentioned the NASCAR thing. There was a whole succession of racist tweets, starting with the white power tweet, remember, from the Villages, they're good people. Then the tweeting of that white couple with the weapons pointed at peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters, and then, of course, the trashing of the Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team for having the temerity to change the names of their mascots or their logos or whatever. What effect does that have, even if a majority of people don't buy it? What effect does that have on a nation and its people, this relentless racism coming out of the President of the United States?
Well, I think, if in anything, the lasting effect is it's delaying how we can heal and have real conversation about our painful history and our painful present and issues that are happening. When the president is leading with such horrible rhetoric, he's allowing people to, one, justify it and truly treat it as though that's a normal way of talking about it and that it's an okay way to discuss race. And he's also allowing people to really ignore the overall issues. He is trying desperately to make this an issue of anger and an issue redefining who is a victim in this moment. And instead, I'd love to see leadership, even if you don't agree with all of the terms and with all the ways in which we're talking about race, you must lead in this difficult moment. And that's what I feel he's doing both with COVID and with race relations. He is refusing to lead. Instead, he's trying to bolster, he's trying to get popular, and he's trying to ride a wave of anger. And that's not helpful in the long term. At the end of the day, we have less trust in government, and our race relations and our healing are also delayed.
Well, you know, in the short term, though, Councilor, the good news, I guess, is the New York Times said the other day, Black Lives Matter may be the largest movement in American history. But I guess my response to that is we all seem to know, I think, what the goal is. But the path to getting there, I think, is a little more complex. You voted just locally, bringing it back home. You voted voted for the city budget. And I know you took a lot of heat. And part of because some critics said there wasn't enough cutting done in the police department, part of your response was, I'll be damned if anyone questions my blackness and my solidarity with people of color based on any vote I take. Does that not speak to how difficult the road from here to there is?
Well, I think that's a little bit trying to make it very, very local in a larger context. The road is difficult because the times are difficult and race relations are difficult and painful. And we all watched a man slowly die while at the hands of police officers. So this is a difficult moment, period. The fact that there's an intense amount of public outcry and grassroots, that's an opportunity. I just want the anger and the energy to be directed for long-term change and systemic change. And that's why I didn't feel the vote was actually going to bring that. That being said, I think that it is for some people becoming a little harder to challenge or to disagree or to even have a different perspective without being completely maybe canceled or completely dismissed as a progressive because they haven't done something the right way or the way that a group of people wanted them to, when they wanted to, and how they wanted to. And they're kind of two different conversations. But ultimately, the difficulty of this moment has been brought on by generations and years of oppression. That's one difficulty. And then how we choose to talk about and deal with it is a different conversation.
You know, Bina, I want to stay in Boston if we can. On the radio today, we spoke to Carolyn Crockett for the first time, the new chief of equity for the city. And we talked about, on one hand, in a place like Boston, some of the issues that have been raised can be dealt with budgetary fixes, with statutory fixes. But it seems to me the tougher changes are the cultural ones. I remember back in the Globe's terrific series on racism in Boston, they did a survey of African Americans across the country, and we were the least welcoming of, I think it was 8 or 9 major cities in the country. How does one attack that? You can't do that with a legislative change.
I think that's true, that there are cultural changes that are absolutely needed around race issues in Boston. There's a reputational issue in addition to a cultural issue behind that. But there are also structural issues that go beyond where the dollars go, that have to do with who gets access to housing, who gets access to certain kinds of social services, community services, healthcare, education. So I think it is cultural. It does require people to make shifts, cultural norms to be set by leaders, for leaders to say certain kinds of behavior is not tolerated. And I think that what's complicated about that, as Councilor Edwards raised, is what we're talking about perhaps is not the same as just saying that no one can say anything unless it passes a certain litmus test of being racially woke, but rather that people's behavior and their attitudes, that we bring them into a culture that Boston as a city moves towards a culture where the right kinds of actions, right, the actions that support racial justice and inclusion are taken at every level of government, and for that matter in the private sector as well, and in the media as well. We're all kind of accountable for this culture. It's not just the city government, but I'm glad to see that there's someone who's going to be charged with the job.
Councilor, do we have the attention span to fix this? We've been down this road before here.
Honestly, you can tell me what being down this road before looks like. I don't think we really have. And the question isn't so much attention span, it's real dollars and real enforcement power that we're going to be given to Ms. Crockett, and whether there's a true commitment beyond the position creating. So I don't think we've been down this road before.
Is there a true commitment in your judgment?
When I see an office that's created with the city council, it has not yet been created with the city council. When I see that she has enforcement powers, when she can fire people, when she can hire her own people and when she has a budget of at least $2 to $3 million that actually is a true investment in what her office is tasked to do, is when I will see a true commitment. I will see a true commitment when the HRC, the Human Rights Commission, it has a $500,000 budget, yet it has one of the most expansive jurisdictions and has more rights. In our HRC legislation of the city of Boston protects more people than the states. I don't see a true commitment yet in those dollars. So when I see money behind that, when I see people getting fired, when I see standards holding people accountable, is when I see a true commitment.
Lydia Edwards, before you go, I just want to clarify, you're in your car, is that correct?
Yes.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. It's great. I love it. Lydia Edwards, Bina Venkataraman, I really appreciate both your time. Thanks so much for being with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great to talk with you both.
Thank you, too.